Morning.
Okay. Morning, Fritz.
Morning, Fritz.
Hi, everyone. This is recording now. So just going to wait another few minutes, I think, but just so everyone's warned.
So Ian is who we would be waiting for. We know Graham is coming in late, and Matt, we hope will also join us. But let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. So this is the December 8th meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, and I will read the script for the governor's orders. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or acts inappropriately. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. In alphabetical order, Gary Beller.
Present.
Sarah Boyce.
Present.
Peter Brace.
Present.
Graham Dervich said she'd be joining us later. Matt Fee.
Here.
Ian Golding, I don't see on the screen yet. Jen Carberg.
Present.
Fritz McClure.
Aye, here.
Thank you. And staff, when I call your name, please answer in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And we had Holly Backus.
Present.
Thank you, Holly. We do not have any speakers slotted onto the agenda, but we may have someone joining us representing the group of consultants if they are able. And if and when they do, we will announce them. So good morning to everyone. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after the members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. In addition, you do have the ability to email written comments to Vince Murphy, vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov, and those emails can be read into the record. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. So Vince, we're adding a further announcement. Vince has more information on the WPI student presentations, which are scheduled for today at 2 o'clock. Vince, would you go ahead and share that agenda for everyone?
Thank you, Mary. The agenda is now shared. Hopefully you're able to see it. There's 5 presentations. There were 5 research groups. The one that's most pertinent to this group is the one at 2:30, which is the Managing Flooding in Nantucket. It's the flooding team. And both I and Peter Morrison, who's co-president of the Civic League, were the sponsors on that project. There are other projects that where there's presentations that might be of interest to committee members. There's the gap analysis for the hazard mitigation plan. I've only had a very brief look at that, but it looks like it's a very interesting project. And seeing as how the Coast Resilience Plan was one of the recommendations from the hazard mitigation plan, it's of interest to this group. Then also related to some of our work at 3:10, it's the greenhouse gas inventory. So it's a baseline for Nantucket. That group was working with Lauren Sinatra, our energy coordinator. I didn't get to see that one at all yet, so I'm particularly interested to see the results of that and how Nantucket can start to work to reducing our greenhouse gases. But if anyone wants, I think I've already sent this out to committee members already, but if anyone else wants it, it's on the town website, and if anyone wants to request it, I'm happy to email it on.
Thank you, Vince. You could stop the screen sharing there. Let me further note that as we found out in the last meeting, we do not have a raise hand feature. So if we have members of the public who wish to speak, the easiest way to make that known is to send me a chat message if you have a comment. If we have a small number of participants, we may be able to do that in just a conversational format. But if you're not being recognized, please make sure you send me a chat message so that I'm aware that you have a comment that you'd like to make. Let's see. So our first agenda item is to continue the public comment. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. We have the approval of minutes. My apologies. And then we'll go to public comment. And just to note, Bruce Mandel, I do have a chat message from him for public comment. So Vince, approval of minutes for October 13th. Do we need to put those up on the screen? I think there's some changes.
Okay, Mary, so I just got a couple ahead of time. There was one down here, which is a correction. It's just a typo, just fixed it. Mary Longacre is hoping to schedule time to hear a presentation by Chip Fletcher, so that's fine. Corrected NCF, and then the third one is here.
So we need to delete the words prepared remarks after the word photograph because we did not receive prepared remarks.
Correct. I inserted the word photograph.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Okay, and again, if I'm not seeing you, I'm trying to run this on 2 screens. So yeah, I'll do my best here, but it's a little difficult. I'm not hearing any comments from the members. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of October 13.
So moved.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Fritz, for seconding. Roll call vote in order. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace. Peter, you're muted.
Aye.
Thank you. I don't see Graham yet. Matt Fee.
Aye.
Ian Golding. I don't see Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you. Next minutes were November 6th.
Just getting to it. So, beg your pardon for 1 second, Mary. I just did some editing and I had to assist Fritz with this one. So most of the remarks in yellow are mine.
Are you sharing the screen, Vince?
Beg your pardon, I'm not. Always one last step. Okay, so I just added Ian to the absent list and added link information for the PDF presentation and for the committee recording. I also just gave a general synopsis of what Chip had been discussing over the entire length of his 2 hours. I know it's quite short, and I'm very happy to take any comment or addition or subtraction.
Any comments from committee members? Jen?
I was absent from that meeting, Vince.
All right, thank you, Jen. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended of November 6th?
So moved.
Thank you, Sarah and Gary. I'll take you as a second. So all those in favor, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee. Did we lose Matt? Matt's coming back there. Matt, are you able to say aye on the minutes or?
Aye.
Thank you. Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Thank you. Those are approved. And then the minutes of November 24th.
So moved.
We haven't seen them yet, Matt, but thank you. So I think there was,
After you, Mary.
so any comments from committee members on the minutes of the 24th? Not seeing any. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from November 24th?
So moved again.
Thank you, Matt.
Second.
Second from Jen, I think it was. In favor, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Thank you for taking care of that. Okay, moving on to continuing public comment on the Arcadis kickoff presentation. Vince, did you receive any comments by email that need to be read into the record? No, okay. Bruce Mandel does have a comment. Can we unmute him so that he can speak to the committee?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the opportunity, and I enjoyed the last Zoom session. I sent you all a chat. The last Zoom meeting when we reviewed the slide presentation, and in particular, there were 2 slides. One was the schedule of the several phases of the project, and another was a description of the various stakeholders and a discussion about when those stakeholders might have an opportunity to participate in providing input into the project. And at the time, I noted to the group that, thank you very much for posting that, that the Nantucket Conservation Association, of which I am a member, was listed as a stakeholder, as was the Nantucket Residents Association. And I pointed out that the Nantucket Residents Association no longer exists because it was merged into the Nantucket Conservation Association, a minor detail. But I also requested that the Nantucket Conservation Association be considered a more primary stakeholder and be more involved in the phase 1 of the schedule of the project. And I didn't see that mentioned in the minutes, but I did want to remind you of that. The other comment I have is an item of concern regarding some of the maps that were used, and I've listed some of them in my comment to you, particularly slide 40 of 60 and 45 of 60. those are pages of that presentation, that dealt with transportation and ecology issues. And I wanted to let the committee know that at this time, the DPW is involved in redesigning both the Massasoit Bridge and the Ames Street Bridge, what more commonly known as Millie's Bridge. And my concern is the engineering report makes careful note that by the year 2030, the Massasoit Bridge will be subject to tidal flooding, making it inaccessible periodically, once, twice a week, something like that. It's not clear, but they certainly mention it will be subject to tidal flooding. And they said by the year 2065, it will be subject to daily tidal flooding. This is a serious transportation and ecological concern that many of us have in Nantucket. And I would request that the committee become a little bit familiar with that aspect of the engineering report, which is available online. And hopefully you can get it from DPW, Director McNeil, or if not, I can send you a copy. And I would request that the committee consider recommending to DPW that while they are rebuilding, particularly the Massasoit Bridge, they consider raising the elevation of the bridge so that it is less impacted by the tidal flooding issue.
Thank you, Bruce. Vince, do we have anything in particular that we want to respond to that? I know that we're not bound to respond to public comment, but if we have an opportunity, we certainly can.
Yeah. Hey, Bruce, good to see you again.
Thank you.
And I think the first time I've ever met Bruce was the day that I was out in Nantucket with the engineers to look at Massasoit Bridge and Millie's Bridge with Rob McNeil. We got to have a good look around. I think one of the plans that they were talking about, and one of the things that's going to be in the next phase, is looking at elevating Massasoit Bridge something like, is it 4 or 5 feet, and redoing the entire approach junction, and on the opposite side regrading to match on the head of the plane side. So as I understand it, these are all plans that are underway, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
I think you're misunderstanding something. The current plans do not call for elevating it. They call for renovating it at its current elevation with the approaches you just mentioned, and the addition of a pedestrian walkway so we can get all the children and folks who like to watch the crabs and the turtles off the roadway. That's where it stands now. The current plan, it's the preliminary design right now, but the current plans do not call to elevate it above the current location as far as I can see. That's why I'm asking the committee to consider a recommendation that the redesign take that into consideration.
Fritz, did you have a comment?
Comment only in the sense that I recall that the DPW director did make a presentation to us. May have been the same day that Jen, that the Conservation Foundation and the town, maybe, I forget, made presentations regarding the replenishment at Millie's Bridge. And so I think there may be something in the minutes of that meeting, because I do remember that issue, but I'm just noting it. I don't recall what the minutes said, and I'm certainly not questioning whether Bruce's the veracity of his statement. I'm just adding to, trying to embellish on what we may or may not have heard.
And yes, Fritz, you're right. The DPW director did make a presentation on those bridges. My recollection, and I'm not saying that this is 100% correct, is that is in line with what Bruce is saying, is that there were two options presented to us that were under consideration. One was the engineering study and the other was the to address it in the short term. So we may all be correct, but I don't know if a final plan has been put in place on exactly what to do there. But Bruce, I thank you for bringing that up again. It's certainly an issue that merits consideration. It should be addressed in the coastal resilience plan. I don't know if the committee has an independent avenue to offer an opinion on that, but it's certainly something we should keep track of. I see Sarah's hand. I want to ask one more question on Bruce's behalf, and that is, Vince, did the Nantucket Conservation Association get added to the priority one group? And can we make sure that the stakeholders list removes the Nantucket Residents Association, which does not exist, as Bruce pointed out?
Definitely able to remove that, as it does not exist. That's a simple one. I was hoping to get to talk about this later, but it's not good pertinent time to mention this. All of the different groups that are going to be approached are broken into 3 phases. At the moment, there are no homeowner groups within phase 1. I think Civic League is in phase 1. So that would be the only way of approaching that. I have to go check that, by the way. But just to be very open and very clear, everyone across all 3 phases will be contacted in turn. It's the reason for phasing is to get the timing of it right and make sure that we have time to contact everyone. If we bring up one homeowner group up to phase 1, everyone will want it, and then the point of phasing and then the timing will be entirely lost.
Okay, thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch, but I want to remind you that the Nantucket Conservation Association is not one resident. We have hundreds of members and property in Nantucket.
We appreciate that, Bruce, but the stakeholder list prioritization, I think, is ultimately Arcadis's bailiwick. They're the ones doing the work. But thank you for bringing up your concern. It's certainly helpful to know when people are interested. So I do appreciate that. Can we go to Sarah?
So first of all, Vince, you're still screen sharing, if that matters to you. The point I was just going to make was just to note that our recommendation to the select board that was adopted to consider the sea level rise information that we put in that, that is a way that we can point to, or that can be pointed to for the elevation of the bridges, I guess is what I just want to remind everyone and to Mr. Mandel that is one of the things we have done meant to be in the meantime for the coastal resiliency plan, which will be addressing the transportation at a stronger level, I guess I would say.
Matt, please.
Yeah, I think the issue we're going to have is rebuilding is going to be a lot cheaper, and some of these things are underway. So you have the psychology of previous investment. Well, we already spent so much time. We better do it this way. We already did it. We'll fix it later. And I think Bruce is right, and I think our request is right. We should be, let's spend a little bit more now to carry us for 30 years. So, but it's hard, as someone who's brings these things up at board meetings occasionally, we're already so far down the line that nobody can be changing anything. So it becomes very difficult.
Thank you, Matt. If I remember correctly, we'd have to go back to the recording. I think that the DPW director did reference our recommendation for sea level rise, and that was part of how they came up with the 2 options. One was a short-term option that could accommodate less sea level rise, but it was understood to be short-term. The other option was looking at the long-term scenario and trying to determine if it was going to be cost-effective to address that. I may be paraphrasing that a little bit inaccurately, but that was my recollection. Fritz, please.
Yeah, and I would just further note in the minutes that his comment was that these were very preliminary
Yes.
concepts. So I don't know what that necessarily means, but those are at least the terms he used. So I think the impression we were left with, at least I was left with, is these were conceptual ideas. These were not things that were in any advanced planning or budgeting stage. Perhaps I'm wrong.
Fritz, is it correct that those projects would have to appear at the planning board in order to go forward? Not really? Okay. No,
No,
Holly's shaking her head. No. Okay.
no, not the
So
planning board. Maybe
again,
the planning commission.
yeah, our recollections, of course, are as of the date of the meeting, and things may have changed since then. That's always a possibility. But let's move on. Are there other members of the public who want to offer comments relating to the presentation of November 24th?
Mary, I would, it's Deanne.
Yes, Deanne, go ahead.
Thank I'm making this comment just as a citizen, not in my role with the Coastal Conservancy. And it has to do with our strategies related to protecting historic structures. And I'm reminded when Rob Young was here about 5 years ago, he's a noted coastal planner, said to at two presentations that elevating structures is like standing in the middle of a rising stream and rolling up your pants. And that comment has always stayed with me. And as I've watched the presentations, and Holly, maybe this was from the municipal vulnerability conferences, I'm not sure, but so many of the strategies are elevating or raising historic structures. And the examples given are Charleston and Annapolis. And I think we're much different. We're a small island, we're not a city. And I would just hope that when we're looking at various ways of protecting historic structures, we will keep in mind other strategies other than elevating them. Such as relocation, which is such a part of our history. Sorry about that. I'm kind of outside my field of expertise, but I just hope Holly and others will take that under advisement.
Thank you, Deanne.
Thank you.
A note for the minutes that Graham Durovich just joined us. Welcome, Graham. Are there other public comments? Bruce, I'm going to, oh no, it's a longer one than I thought. Bruce, do you want to add that verbally, or should I just read that comment into the minutes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, that comment was sent to everyone, and it was just kind of a summary of the discussion to basically say that the design work of the two bridge projects is in the preliminary stages, although that report is posted, and it shows the less costly approaches with almost no revision to Millie's Bridge other than addressing some more maintenance type issues and maintaining the current elevation of the Massasoit Bridge. It's a preliminary report, and hopefully some of these comments will help make that report as it transitions further to hopefully address the concerns that we're talking about today.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that. Holly Backus would like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To address Deanne's comments about Resilient Nantucket with our historic structures, I want to just emphasize first, our consultants has a survey that's been floating around social media with the town, multiple different locations. It's on the town website through the Resilient Nantucket page. All you got to Google is Resilient AC. You can find it. I recommend answering those that survey. Send it out to anybody that's interested in coastal resiliency for historic structures on Nantucket. Second, I want to notate that, and I agree, we all need to realize that we're in a pandemic, and our Resilient Nantucket consultants have been working as best as they possibly can without being able to physically come to Nantucket. And yes, there were some photographs that were provided in some of the webinars that were done that were using other places besides Nantucket. I can tell you that one of our consultants has been to Nantucket during COVID, tested negative so he could come here, was brought around, looked at Nantucket's architecture to bring that in mind. Second, these design guidelines that are going to be going in the next couple of months through a review process with the Historic District Commission, as well as the public, are going to be following the National Park Service's recommendation for historic structures within coastal communities for adaptation. So that was a document that the National Park Service went through and created exactly November of last year. And that's obviously a guide, if you will, for historic districts to making sure that how do you balance the Secretary of the Interior standards in retaining our historic identity. Remember, we are a National Historic Landmark, so that's important. Second, how are we wanting it to be done? So elevation obviously is going to be discussed. Wet proofing is going to be discussed. All those are what we call a toolbox, and that's something our consultant's also working on. The National Park Service is actually working on a detailed, more all in language. It's all written, so you have to kind of figure out what exactly they're mentioning. But that PDF has been on the Resilient Nantucket's webpage since it was literally hot off the press, and I had our public outreach coordinator for the town put it on the website. So that is available to the public. Again, that's guidance for how we're going to be creating these design guidelines. And I also want to know our consultants are pretty much top notch in the country with experience in preservation for many, many, many years. It just happens that Annapolis and Charleston, they may be our southern counterparts from a historic perspective, but they have been doing this and doing their own renditions of how do we adapt accordingly. So I just want to note to that. Please take the survey if you haven't done that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Holly. Fritz, go ahead.
Madam Chair, just a question to Holly, if I may. You're referencing the guidelines for the HDC. Do any of those guidelines then fall over into other areas of planning? I know building code is a state code, but are there other aspects of any of this that would fall in other areas of the planning department besides HDC?
That's where the coastal resiliency plan is going to come into play. So again, that's why Vince and I have been working very closely on making sure when it came to creating the RFPs for both projects, for both Resilient Nantucket and for the coastal resiliency plan, making sure that there's that connectivity with preservation. Because we obviously, reason why we were doing Resilient Nantucket is a state grant that we received. We are the crowning jewel, if you will, in the preservation world in Massachusetts. They're looking at other coastal communities are looking at Nantucket to see how we create these design guidelines. So long story to that is yes, there will be, but that will be through the coastal resiliency plan. What these design guidelines are going to be for Resilient Nantucket is literally an addendum onto building with Nantucket in mind for adaptation, elevation, wet proofing.
Fritz, go ahead.
Follow up? Yeah. And again, just a comment. I have a daughter who lives in Situate, Mass, and I happen to be, for other reasons, looking through their zoning ordinance, and I noticed that I noted that Situate has severe flooding, storm surge problem. Every time there's a huge storm, you see the concrete seawall at Situate as an example of what's happening. But so they certainly have a lot of issues. But I just noted that they have used or they use an overlay, a resilience overlay district on their zoning map to for purposes of imposing additional requirements or limitations in terms of zoning, building, that type of thing. Just mentioning it. So I'm guessing that that might be one approach that we would be looking at sometime in the future.
Thank you.
Might be.
Maybe.
Thank you, Holly and Fritz. Other public comments on the presentation from November 24th from the Arcadis group of consultants? All right, I don't have anybody message me in the chat. So we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is continuing the committee's discussion of the Arcadis presentation. There were several asks from Arcadis in their presentation of the committee, and we wanted to have more time to absorb what they were asking for and come up with responses. So in particular, one of the things that they asked for was, let's see if I can pull this up here. I think this is on their page 14 of their presentation. How can this project add social, economic, and ecological value and improve the quality of life on Nantucket? That was one that struck me as a really great opportunity to help the community relate to the Coastal Resilience Plan. So it's not quite as abstract as just armoring or dumping sand or letting erosion happen, but what are the benefits that we can hope for or plan for in this effort? And in particular, one of the things that was mentioned during the meeting was the potential to support or enhance the shellfishing industry. That would be a wonderful additional benefit of whatever measures might be taken to enhance coastal resilience. So if there are other ideas, let's start there. Yes, Sarah?
Hi, yeah, I mean, I know this has been mentioned before, but I think in terms of framing it for how it improves quality of life overall, I was thinking a lot about that maintaining connectivity, and that includes emergency services. But I think when a lot of people, like the general public, hear about our group and the work that the plan is doing, they're thinking coastal. So they're thinking immediately like homes and businesses on the coast and the town. And I think it would be wise to sort of, both with Arcadis, but also in the outreach component, emphasize that this does really affect everyone. So if you're, different neighborhoods that people live in, like we were just talking with Bruce about Nantucket, like that the plan will inform the projects like bridges, roadway improvements, and infrastructure. And so I think all of those things that I'm mentioning have been mentioned as part of the plan, but framing it in that way that people can understand that it really will improve overall, quality of life wherever they live. So like that, improving access for emergency services and everything like that. And then I just think this is a good place too to emphasize the making sure we reach out to all the diverse groups within our community, language wise, cultural wise. And so I think that needs to be a really important part at multiple aspects and not just a separate side note, whether it's both through the education, outreach, people coming to meetings and that kind of thing. So I think having all those aspects, saying, how can we improve your quality of life? Like how can this, getting input like that to see how we can include parts into the Coastal Resiliency Plan that will improve that. That makes sense. Sorry, little rambling.
And I remember Vince's opening remarks from the previous meeting. He said something sort of like, the goal of the Coastal Resilience Plan is to extend the longevity of Nantucket. We know we won't be here forever, but the longer that we can be here and enjoy it, that's what we're aiming for. And Vince, if I'm misquoting you, forgive me. But okay, other comments, either on, ancillary benefits that might come along with coastal resilience, or on other aspects of what Arcadis asked for?
Can I add one
Yes,
more quick
please,
thing?
Sarah. Yep.
Just improved public transportation. I foresee that being a potential, if not addressed specifically by Arcadis, but as a potential recommendation. And that includes the boats, right? Like that's a big part of the logistics of our infrastructure, is how we get on and off the island. So I think that's another way that we can talk about improving quality of life, is public transportation.
So you're not referring specifically to public transportation, but to all forms of transportation? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, I guess at all forms of transportation. I was thinking originally of just public transportation, but I'm thinking of the ways transportation affect everyone. So even if you don't have a car, if you don't ride a bike regularly, like what are the parts of transportation that you're affected by? Everyone is affected by the boats, for example. So I'm just thinking of ways that how we can, how this affects every single person that lives on the island.
Vince, go ahead.
And
then
Sarah, I hate paraphrasing. I'm just trying to take notes so I can send things to Arcadis. That was one of the points of this, so that they can continue to be updated. Would it make sense to say, I hate paraphrasing, like I said, supply chain resilience?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Supply chain resilience, the boats coming and going, making sure we can get goods and services on and off the island.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, Graham, go ahead, please.
I can't remember if Arcadis is familiar with the Select Board's strategic plan, but I think a lot of where we want to see our community going is captured within that. The transportation goal kind of fits within that, with additionally what Sarah was talking about, and environmentally. I know there's water quality issues included in that. And so I think that could be a good thing to help them familiarize themselves with. Looks, Holly's shaking her head yes, so it looks like they know.
That's good, because I was going to make sure that Vince, made them aware if they didn't have it. So thank you. To follow up on that, Graham, one of the things that I remember seeing in other presentations was that when projects were initiated for coastal resilience, frequently they also offered additional opportunities for public recreation. Whether that's a bike path or a walking trail, or some way of the public accessing a space that was not previously accessible. And on Nantucket in particular, we might look at that as preserving access to beaches that will not be accessible in the near future due to the effects of sea level rise, erosion, and flooding. Looks like Holly has a comment. Holly, do you have time to go ahead and do that verbally?
Sure, I just wanted to mention, thank you, Madam Chair, that yes, when staff met with Arcadis way in the beginning, and they were, brought all the different plans to their attention, not only verbally, but also it was addressed in the RFP of all the different plans that are available, hazard mitigation plan, all that kind of stuff. So yes, they are definitely aware of the strategic plan that the Select Board has, which is great.
Thank you, Holly. Other comments? If I remember that one of the other topics that was discussed briefly was the opportunity for boat launches. Making sure that not only do we maintain our existing access, but the possibility of adding more access for that. So if there are things that people think of, let's make sure that we communicate them to Vince and he can pass them on to Arcadis.
Can I add one? Sorry,
yes,
Madam
Sarah,
Chair.
Please go ahead.
I'm sorry. In addition to the boat access, I think it would be nice to make sure that there's different types of access. So maintaining and or increasing access for larger boats, or like different, to be aware of the different size boats. So not just recreational boats, but thinking we wouldn't want the town pier to go away, for example, or any of all the different things that we talked about at the last meeting, the different launches. And I know, and so making sure there's discussions with groups that have expertise and knowledge in those areas would be important. I'm sure it's already been discussed, but just since we're talking about it, I thought it would be good to.
Vince, I don't remember off the top of my head, do we have the various marinas on our stakeholders list? They certainly should be.
Yes,
Yes,
everyone
okay.
that has anything to do with waterfront, particularly in the downtown area and in Nantucket, is already in there.
Great.
Just while I'm here, everyone's talking about waterfront access. In some ways, I see NCC, Deanne, if you wish to comment, you'd be very welcome, as one of the main flag carriers for that, and making sure that there is adequate public access and a variety of public access to the waterfront. It's one of the things that I want to make sure of, and I think that the Coastal Conservancy will also be very interested in.
Deanne, go ahead if you have a comment.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Vince. Yes, we will keep an eye out on that. I was thinking after the November 24th meeting that we do have to communicate to the consultants. I think we mentioned it on the 24th, that access to the water is a core value for us, and it's what sets Nantucket apart from other coastal communities or islands like the Vineyard. And so we will keep that in mind, and the more we can communicate it to them, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. Peter, please go ahead.
Yeah, for access to the water, you got to include, in terms of champions for that, you got to include the land bank, because that seems to be one of their main missions these days is, buying properties, moving them off, which is useful in a lot of ways. And also make note of Andy Lowell, who is our current chairman of the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. Since he's been on that board, he has, spent many, many hours trying to seal up an emergency, find a place that is an emergency boat landing, because downtown all we have is, 2 lanes at Children's Beach. And I guess if we if we begged them at Great Harbor Yacht Club as well, but I would think that as the water comes up, that'll be a thing that we're going to want to have. We don't know the fate of the bay scallop fishery. My sense is it's going to keep going, but either way, we still need places to launch boats, and I would say including Andy Lowell and the land bank, along with the Coastal Conservancy, would be the wise thing.
Thank you, Peter. Other comments regarding the presentation or other notes that we want to have Vince take back to Arcadis for their consideration? Vince?
I can skip around through any part of this presentation that anyone's interested in reviewing further.
I know that one of the questions Arcadis asked was if the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee had any role that they had not already captured in their slide. And that was something that we asked for more time to consider. Did anybody come up with another way that the committee members would be interacting with Arcadis in creating the plan? I did have one suggestion for Vince. Peter, go ahead and then I'll follow up.
Well, I just had a general question. Looking at this, what does project success look like? I guess it looks like putting the action items into action, as quickly as we can do that without too many hurdles. And one of those hurdles, and I don't know if it's even a hurdle at all, but how many of our action items do we envision needing town meeting approval? If any of them, I'm just wondering. That's it.
Thank you, Peter. So the interviews that are coming up that Arcadis will be doing one of the things that occurred to me is obviously they can't do them in conjunction with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. But I think I've seen in the past where transcripts of remarks were available, and I think that would be helpful. What is the committee's feeling on that?
Can you repeat that, Mary, the question?
Yeah, so the Arcadis will be talking with a long list of stakeholders, and the committee will not be part of those conversations directly, but I think it would be helpful to us if transcripts could be made available, so that if an organization expresses a concern or offers information, the committee should be aware of that, so that we're able to use that in our consideration as well. That's sort of the point I'm coming from. And I think in the past I have seen consultants release transcripts of remarks so that they were available to people to be able to absorb and incorporate into their further discussions. Holly's nodding her head yes, so that sounds like an endorsement.
Yes, Madam Chair, I just wanted to mention that was, if you look at the hazard mitigation plan, the back of that long document, there's information from interviewees. Also, for instance, WPI students, when they interview specific people for their projects, they do ask whether or not that they can be recorded, so that way people can, have a look at what was discussed previously by those people. So yes, that should be something that would be common, but I'm glad you've notated that.
Thank you,
Madam Chair. Yep.
And I thought I saw Matt. Did you have a hand wave?
Yeah, I did on the earlier part. Yeah, I'm not concerned, if they do that, that's great. If they don't, that's fine with me on the previous. Two things that I didn't ask when they were here. What is the bathtub model? They talked about, basing us on the bathtub model. And I don't know if we've discussed that. And then the other part is we have to, there's two other things. We can't just think of it as retreat. There may be areas where we where we expand. We might we might go into the harbor and put a berm with, a reef on one side and a bike path on the other, on top of it. There's places they do that in Holland in different areas. For downtown, it might be different. We might not be able to, we may raise everything a little bit, but we might, go out and protect it a little bit. So it's not just retreat. I think sort of areas like Sacagawea Pond right now, we should be thinking about, when we start to spend money, this is probably just another, fix, but should we start lifting those so that the water can go underneath and start to make a wetland on the other side? I would argue the sooner we start making those changes, the cheaper it will be, not the other way around. The other thing I sent to Vince the other day, I was looking at the Surf Drive in Falmouth, and they had a presentation doing dynamic adaptation pathways. And they were showing, 4 or 5 different ideas that will happen over the next 20 to 50 years, whatever the time frame was. And I think that's something that we need from Arcadis sooner rather than later, particularly for SBPF, for that whole situation. Right now it's polarized and we're only looking at it 2 ways, which is moving it, getting rid of it entirely, or building it bigger and stronger. Is there somewhere in between those two positions that might make sense? And I don't think that's going to come up. That's not going to bubble up from us, from either side of that situation. So if we could, I asked Vince if we could if we're going to be doing something like dynamic adaptation pathways for our meetings, can we have that pushed earlier in the process because it's such an issue right now? So those are my thoughts from last week.
Thank you, Matt. Further comments from the committee members? Okay. I'll ask the public again if they want to comment on the Arcadis presentation from November 24th, just to give people another opportunity if they've had a moment to think about anything. If not, then I think we are ready to move on to the next topic on the agenda, which is an update on the South Shore erosion following the storms of the recent months. We have Jeff Carlson who's joined us. We're also expecting Jen Carberg and Vince Murphy to offer information. Vince, do you have an order in which people want to proceed, or should we get to Jeff first so we can let him go? Or
Yeah, I think just outlining some of the issues first, I can do that very, very quickly. And then Jeff can step in after that. And then once we look at how other issues might affect large landowning organizations, Jen could comment at that point,
Great,
if that makes
thank you.
sense.
Go ahead.
So I'm just going to share my screen yet again. Hopefully I won't be showing my emails this time. Beg your pardon now. So I've just put together some photographs for comparison for some of the issues that have happened in some of the more notable pieces of erosion on the South Shore. So this is in Nantucket. The first two places are in Nantucket, and I literally turned around to take the difference between the first set of pictures and the last ones. These are from the end of Massachusetts Avenue looking eastward. The top two photographs are from May, where you can see this house is on a bank, and it's got about 11, 12 yards of distance between the base of the house and the edge of the coastal bank. The coastal bank was severely eroded over the winter the previous year, but you can see earlier this month in December, beg your pardon, let's go back. We've had a couple of events whereby the coastal bank is retreated and more of the foundation of the pilings of the house are exposed. So it's just a nice static location where you can see what the coastal bank is doing. It's done this in the past and come back, so just have to bear that in mind as well. The access point at Smith's, as though you're going to drive out there, on the top you can see a picture from August where there was a bank that was difficult to get down. You might get a Jeep down there, but getting a Jeep back up there would be very difficult to impossible, which is why Smith's Point was closed to beach driving for several months. In August, in October, it had improved, and you can see this fence line here on the corner of one of the properties as you access. The last fence post is just off the edge of the photograph, but that is this fence post down here, if everyone can see what the cursor is doing. He lost his front yard, basically, at this property. So I was there on the 2nd and again on the 6th on Sunday, just to have a look. The coastal bank has smoothened out. You could probably access the beach. It wouldn't be great to come up and down this in a vehicle, but then if you got out further, you're going to run into other spots of erosion. So access at Smith's is an issue, but the having the house and the fence line shows what has changed in very recent times. This is I'm glad to see Jennifer Jordan is still on. This is the corner of Sheep Pond Road, also in the Nantucket area. Both of these photographs were taken by Jeff, and I've got to give credit to him for letting me use these. You can see on the top of the coastal bank, this is the area that's left. It's about 25, 27 feet of coastal bank remaining. Jeff went there yesterday to check it. It's still about the exact same distance of coastal bank. There's been washover up onto it. There's an extra depth of sand. That's a good thing as far as more protection goes, even though it's kind of minor. But the coastal bank hasn't lost much, which is about the only good thing I can say about it. But this is an area that we're monitoring extremely closely. And I think Bruce Mandel was also interested in this area as well, if I'm not mistaken. Then at the end of Hummock Pond Road, at the access to Cisco Beach, everyone knows that this area has had quite a lot of erosion in September, and Jeff is going to get on to talking about that. But towards the end of September, this is what it looked like on the left, and on the right-hand side, there isn't much change. There's minor, an increase in erosion, a minor amount, but it's in the order of inches to a foot, but nothing major. And once we get talking about this area, this is a good place for Jeff to pick up and talk about the issues there.
All right, thank you, Vince. Can everyone hear me this morning?
Yes,
all right, good morning. Sorry to be kind of just the sitting there in the dark for a while listening along. But I'm happy to answer any questions when we get through it. And I know everyone's pretty familiar with these situations, but to kind of talk about what we've seen really in the last 4 months on the South Shore has been pretty remarkable in the sense that we've really seen some pretty extreme erosion events in pretty isolated areas over time and not as much in areas that are kind of in between. So I think what we've been seeing in Nantucket, especially at the end of Mass Ave, where, you know, Vince was kind enough to put up those photos of the house at 34 and 36 Mass Ave, and the amount of beach that's been lost or changed there. And then I think when we move down to the Hummock Pond area down at 287 and 289 for that house that's been there. So in the process of that house, just to kind of let you know where we are. So that was a house that was able to be relocated further back on the lot, and removal of a couple of structures that were there. They had come into the Conservation Commission and gotten permitting for that move and shift prior to even any of that erosion happening. They were kind of thinking in advance and mobilized at a much quicker pace to get there. Unfortunately, since that point, the house was relocated on that lot. A lot of the structures still remain on the beach. The Conservation Commission has issued out enforcement actions on that, and the Conservation Commission has started down the path of daily fining because of the inaction that's there, in an effort to kind of spur that action along. So that's kind of where both of those are. Obviously, in both cases, you know, it's something where we look very closely. A lot of the concern and move off and orders from the town to either be condemned or moved or taken down, a lot of times relates directly to the ability for the site to handle both potable water and wastewater and its availability. We're tracking the tanks at 34 and 36 Mass Ave pretty closely because they've just uncovered on top, but haven't exposed to the point where they certainly couldn't be recovered. But that's something that we're going to be kind of checking on a weekly basis, especially as we move through the winter. These areas for Sheep Pond and Hummock Pond Road, and also for Nantucket Road and Mass Ave are areas that we pretty regularly check, especially after extreme weather events like we had this last week. So the Conservation Commission also kind of asked for the same reports, and those are things that when we need to, we can mobilize for either an emergency action permit or for an enforcement if there's things that need to be picked up, and can use those tools to try to get things off the beach and get things back into compliance. So instead of me talking at no end for this, I'm happy to answer any questions people have specifically, whether it's in regards to permitting process or site specific. But I'm happy to address any questions or concerns that you guys have.
Let me start off and then we'll go to Fritz. So one of the reasons that I asked for this update, I think we all generally follow, you know, erosion events on the South Shore, particularly when they're dramatic. And I think we all understand that the beach profile changes in the winter. It becomes steeper. You know, there will be some erosion. It's quite likely that it will build back up in the summer months. But what occurred to me is, you know, that's fine until something happens in the winter that can't be fixed. So a house goes in, a pond gets breached. And I began to wonder, you know, how much time do we have as these events, you know, ebb and flow, using the title language, you know, when they hit a high point and something is destroyed that can't be built back in a natural method, we should be aware of, you know, when to expect that. And I'm not asking Jeff and Vince to forecast that, but it did occur to me that, you know, we can talk about the you know, the long-term trends and the averages, but it's the extreme events where we really get irreversible damage. And I wanted to make sure that that was on our radar as a committee, and that perhaps might be something that Arcadis should take into account, is, you know, how long do we have until some of these extreme events that we're not looking forward to might occur, such as a permanent breach of a pond, or a permanent loss of a road, or you know, houses that are at risk. And I think we were all surprised at how fast we lost the house at the end of Hummock Pond Road. So that was my reason for asking for the update, just to be able to introduce that topic for discussion. Jeff, do you have a question or a comment before we go to Fritz?
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of address some of those concerns, and some of those things are processes that are all in place in just to kind of to touch on them briefly. So I mentioned the septic tanks out at 34 and 36 Nantucket Road. Obviously, we're in a situation where, erosion is very episodic, and what happened down at the end of Mothball Way, I don't think anyone predicted the 60 to 70 feet of loss in spots that we saw in that short, less than a month time period is pretty extraordinary for that area. So that being said, we're developing triggers, and I think part of what, at least when I think about what the coastal resiliency plan is going to kind of put together and do, it's something that I think that the Conservation Commission can use as a tool, is not necessarily, trying to forecast or predict, but I think it's to be better prepared and understanding, when we get to a certain proximity, this is the process that we go through. This is how we notify property owners who may or may not be on island, or may not have a caretaker or someone who's checking the property regularly, to be involved in knowing that hey, you're 25 feet away. You need to be ready in case something happens, or you need to get stuff out of your house, or whatever you need to do to help secure your site. But you are now in I hate to use the word danger zone, but you're now in the danger zone for an erosion event or something that could possibly damage your house. I mean, I think we've had a lot of lessons learned. I think the most relevant example I can think of in recent history is also out at the end of Mass Ave, out at 47 Mass Ave, when the house that was formerly owned by the Hennigans ended up going through some emergency permitting on some coastal engineering structures that were put in a hurry. They failed very quickly, and then that house ended up, I think everyone remembers that was around in the 2010, 2011, the pictures of the corners of the foundation missing from that house, and that house ultimately being removed, and then not able to get permits back to rebuild. So I think people would like to avoid that kind of situation and take a more proactive step. And I think that part of, like I said, what the Coastal Resiliency Plan may be able to give those homeowners the tools, and also give the regulatory tools to the Concom necessary to help deal with that. And I think when we talk about other things happening, and I think what you're seeing even at Hummock Pond right now, where you're starting to see, just slightly downdrift from where the house went in and the foundation remains, where you're starting to see a pretty significant amount of sand wash over what would be the natural bank or dune and get into Hummock Pond. I think it's, kind of important to remember, and I think about it quite a bit, especially related to Hummock Pond and Myconic Pond, is those beaches and those dune systems are going to migrate landward, and you're going to see overwashing, and you're going to see the occasional breach of the pond. And I think it's important to note that those processes have been happening for a very long time, and will continue to. I constantly remind myself, and someone sent me this really cool publication from the 60s that talks a little bit about, Clark Cove and Hummock Pond still being one, and how that dune has migrated back and separated those into two separate water bodies. So I think allowing dunes to migrate, and beaches to migrate, and ponds to adapt to that change and be able to do that, they're going to be really good at that. That's what they do. So, trying not to interfere with the course of nature in those areas is something that I think is also important to do.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well put. Fritz, you had a comment.
It was just, I think it's something I mentioned before, but I'll just mention again, since we've got Jeff here. And it does deal with South Shore erosion. And particularly, it's something I've been watching for about 2 years now. It's particularly that area about at Cisco Beach, about where the lifeguard station is typically set, about 200 feet south of there. And it begins to run along what I think is Falmouth Road. I never knew the name till I just looked it up. But there seems to be, that is a dune, which then once you go over the dune, it's all downhill basically to Falmouth Road and to those houses that are built in I'll call it development style, facing the beach and then behind. One very large house just built recently right on that road. And the thing that I've been noticing is again, slow erosion of that dune, and certainly in the wintertime, wash over and sand spilling over the vegetation at the nearest point toward the town beach. And the point that I would simply make is, I guess, that's one area where if that actually breaches, that water will just start flowing downhill all the way down to Falmouth Road, it would seem. And so I don't know whether that's an area you're watching. I do notice that in the summertime, that vegetation grows back up again, or the sand moves, whatever. But it is slowly, I would say, slow progress, slowly progressing back toward Falmouth Road. Just a comment.
Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, sure. So I think to answer your question, Fritz, I think it's something that, you know, we try to get eyes on as many spots as possible when we have these big storm events. I know, you know, our staff and Vince and I primarily get a fair amount of windshield time kind of during and after some of these events to kind of see what's going on. And this, you know, the situation here with the dune and potential breaching is not uncommon. I mean, we see it all along that section of Shoreline through Cisco. I mean, I think you can certainly get down into the Surfside and Nobadir area, and you can see areas that have kind of a dune fronting that coastal bank, and then some topographic change behind it where it ridges and then it slopes down. So I don't think that, you know, that situation's uncommon, but I do think it's something that, you know, I think a big part of all of this is for these people who are living in these homes and knowing that the environment around them is changing from when they maybe purchased their home, even last year or 2 years ago or 30 years ago, that again, equipping people with the tools to understand, you know, what resources they have at their disposal, or, hey, maybe it's time to really start thinking about finding somewhere else to put your house. I mean, we've seen it happen. I hate to use the house from the end of the Nantucket Road, but I think everyone remembers, I think at the time the house number was actually 333 Nantucket Road, but it was the one that was called End House. And it's now moved from the end and it's back down, you know, Washington Street and on a lot that they were able to secure and move that house because it was frankly, you know, on borrowed time for where it was. And I think that, you know, having these people realize that could be happening here is important. I have some concerns, obviously, especially for the one in the middle that, you know, Falmouth Avenue could be, you know, problematic as well, even before the house is threatened, that they may not have access and that's the only road that they front on it. And how do we make sure that those people can get in and out or emergency vehicles can get there? And I think, again, when we look at these areas, identifying those concerns and then, you know, finding reasonable, at least solutions during the time that we have to try to, you know, to try to adapt is something that's going to be important for all of us to do and, you know, for this committee to certainly consider.
Thank you, Jeff. Other comments? Peter. Peter, go ahead. You're muted.
I first want to say I will cede to the scientists in our group. The first thing I want to say is this would be a good opportunity to reach out to the area associations that are imperiled, as we have or will do with Nantucket as well as the Cisco area, and really get the message to them that, you know, the ocean is coming, if you haven't already noticed, once it crests that dune, you know, and then everything that Jeff said, yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah. Something that's been rattling in my brain a lot is that the island isn't static. It's not a pile of sand that will never be replenished. And once the breach happens or whatever, then that's it. As long as enough sand down on the east end of the island moving down the south shore, eventually things get filled in. But that doesn't mean we're not shrinking because of that, like, you know, with Hither Creek. So I would suggest for anybody who hasn't seen it, this publication here, the Nantucket Shoreline Survey, really good thing to read. It was done, I believe, in 1979. And I'll just read, it says, an analysis of Nantucket shoreline erosion and accretion trends since 1846. It's very informative. it might explain a lot. So.
Thank you, Peter. We do have a request for public comment from Jennifer Jordan. Vince, can you unmute her?
Hi,
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
it's Jennifer Jordan, 39 Sheep Pond Road. I am a full-time resident as of January 1st. I want to thank the committee for everything you're doing, and specifically this conversation because of the pictures of the corner of Sheep Pond Road and the most recent comment by Jeff. I would ask the committee to help the residents on Sheep Pond Road push forward a plan from the town to create a new road for us to access our homes. The residents of Sheep Pond have been in touch with Libby Gibson, Ken Bogrand, Nantucket Conservation, Mr. Collier, and people have been receptive, but I keep feeling as if it's being put on the back burner. And per this conversation, we all know that one storm could take 25 feet and the 20 homes could not have propane delivered in this cold winter. We couldn't access our house, or God forbid, we need an emergency vehicle. So I would just ask if there's anything the committee could do, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Other comments regarding erosion specifically on the South Shore, but also potentially any other point on the island at this time?
Mary.
Jeff, yeah, Deanne, go ahead, and then we'll go to Jeff.
Thank you, Mary. I want to draw everyone's attention to the end of Hummock Pond Road, immediately to the right. There is a property, I think it's 283, but I'm not sure of the number. But in about 2015, that property owner installed a long sheet wall underground, and it was just outside of the jurisdiction of the Concom because, as you know, walls are prohibited in Massachusetts since 1978. We have always been concerned that once that erosion, because it's an erosion hotspot, reaches that wall, okay, we will now have a wall, and that's going to impact the beach, and it's also could impact the end of Hummock Pond Road with scouring. So I don't know if Jeff, in your, or Vince, if you have noticed in driving down there, how close the erosion is coming to where we think that wall, I mean, we can't see the wall, but we know it's there because we have photos of its installation. So maybe if you could just comment on that. If that happens, it will be the first wall on the South Shore, and it doesn't augur well for our beaches in that area.
Thank you, Deanne. Jeff, please go ahead.
Sure, I'll try to get to all of those. So back to Sheep Pond Road for 1 second. I know there are discussions that the town is having with the Conservation Foundation currently, and as you know, I know our next meeting about it is next week with kind of both parties to try to resolve for some sort of alternative access to get to Sheep Pond. So it is something that you know, we understand it's a priority. It's something that we're checking and we're trying to move along. The foundation was great the first time we had to relocate the road and providing an access easement across there. We're hoping to get to some resolution to help Sheep Pond Road, and if that doesn't work out, to find an alternative means. But it is something that definitely is a known priority of the town, and I know sometimes you don't see it on the ground for groundbreaking or something that's happening, but I think being prepared is something that we would like to do. So I'm happy to keep Ms. Jordan kind of in the loop for what's happening there, if that would be helpful. But definitely agree that that's something that needs to happen. As for the wall on Hummock Pond Road, I think Deanne did a pretty good job of explaining kind of what happened, where the wall that was installed was outside of any jurisdiction of all town agencies. And I know for a fact, because we did the same thing and kind of moved it up the chain to state and federal agencies even. And, you know, it didn't seem that anyone could find any permits that were required for that structure at the local, state, or federal level. And we kicked the tires as hard as, you know, groundwater intercept permits and all kinds of stuff that were there. But it is something that we do actively monitor. I mean, it's, it's going to create kind of an unprecedented situation that we found where, when that wall exposes, whether it's, a foot or 100 feet, what's going to happen and what's going to go on. And, are you going to be having an impact to a resource area from a pre-existing structure, and how is that going to play out? And, how is the discussion and legalities of that going to go? So we do kind of keep track. It seems to me from the kind of the basic last measurements we had on it, it's seemingly about 70 to 80 feet, depending on where you look, from being exposed. So there's still a bit, but again, is as soon as it, if it picks up the pace like it did down the way, where they lost 60 feet, that distance gets really small very quickly. So again, it's something that's there because I think we want to be prepared from our end if it does expose, what exactly are, the legal necessities from the town. How should the town be viewing it? What other potential relevant case law is in place in Massachusetts to deal with structures of this nature. It'll be kind of interesting. I mean, I know, and not to take up everyone's time, but to reference back to the house that was not permitted down at 47 Mass Ave, when that rebuild was denied by the Conservation Commission and upheld through court, the big part of that case that kind of won the day in that discussion was the use hadn't changed, or the requested use hadn't changed, but the resource area had. And those changes were deemed to be significant enough that if you were trying to rebuild in the coastal dune, that may have been something that was possible and permissible by law, but rebuilding in the actual coastal beach, which is subject to tidal influence on almost a daily basis, is something that is not. And that resource area change was found to be significant enough by state superior court that that decision was upheld, and essentially is kind of the relevant case law for that. So it's a little bit apples to oranges in this case, but I think it's more like, different types of apples to other kinds of apples, where it's similar enough where I think you can draw some comparisons to that and hopefully try to predict how that would go. But it is something that we're definitely trying to be actively prepared for that situation if it comes up.
Thank you, Jeff. And so Vince, that may be a gap in regulations, which is one of the things the committee is charged with discovering and addressing, and certainly something that Arcadis can further research for us if that is deemed to be a potential area of concern. My first thought is if it's happened once, it can happen again. So definitely something I think we should follow along with, either with what is happening at that particular location, but also how can we prevent that situation from occurring in the future.
Something we can definitely look into.
Yeah. Other comments? Okay, and I don't have anybody else from the public wishing to comment, so
Mary,
we do have,
I
I'm
think
sorry?
Jen does want to speak,
Oh,
and
thank you, Jen.
I
Go
had
ahead.
one comment as well.
We'll go ahead with Jen and then let Vince respond.
Okay. You had asked me to speak on this, so I figured I would.
Yes.
I'd been holding my comments.
Thank you for reminding me. I apologize.
No worries. No worries at all. And I don't want to repeat anything that has already been said. Jeff and Vince already spoke quite a bit, and I think we have a lot of common knowledge about the kind of the dynamic erosion that is happening on the South Shore. Just the few pieces I wanted to bring up is that, one of the things we've tasked the consultants with is this idea of looking for our risk and vulnerability and doing that analysis. And I'm certainly hoping we've made it clear that the erosion on the South Shore is one of the things that they're going to focus on. And so I'm hoping a lot of these pieces, that we've mentioned, Sheep Pond Road, Nantucket Road, Hummock Pond, a lot of these areas that we're all noticing will also come up as part of that, kind of risk vulnerability assessment that they're doing. And it will be very interesting to see what their recommendations are for the South Shore. Some of the work that Sarah and I have done looking at habitat change around the island, we have noticed that there are areas where there's accumulation, where there's erosion, that we have seen increased kind of loose sand on the island in the last, 15, 20 years. And while it may seem that we're building beaches in certain areas, that sand is much more vulnerable to erosion than, say, our coastal dune fields. And I think looking at these pieces on the island like Nantucket Road, and Jeff mentioned the house that couldn't be rebuilt, down at the end there out towards Smith's Point, a lot of the testimony around that talked of the dune field that had existed previously in that area. But once that dune field, that dune field can take a lot of erosion, a lot of storm events, but once that's gone, and once that's gone from other areas around the island, that's when we really see our increased massive erosion events that can take things away. And, Mary, you mentioned, how can we find that time frame or be prepared for those larger kind of erosion events? And I think there's modeling that can help us with that. And I think we can look at trying to keep our protective natural areas in place, like a priority towards maintaining dune fields or dune systems. But also I think we have to be prepared to accept when the large events happen and then react. So there will be some situations where we'll have to react. And thinking about Hummock Pond and Clark's Cove, the separation of those two ponds was a large storm event that maybe necessarily we couldn't have predicted the exact outcome, and the separation and erosion of those one pond into two is something we'd now just accept and react to. The other reason that, and anyone can ask me questions after this, but the other reason I think you asked me to speak was from the perspective of the Conservation Foundation, and we do have significant land on the South Shore where over the past 10 years we've noticed erosion, and our response as far as maintaining our properties and maintaining resilience has been to really actively move our infrastructure away from the shoreline. So in most places that we have property on the South Shore, if we have access roads, parking lots, things of that nature, we have been actively pulling them back and away from the resource area, from the shoreline, so that we can, help reduce impact of access along those dune fields, and honestly give the beach space to migrate, because that's what we expect to happen with erosion. We've also very actively closed down beach driving access from a lot of our properties on the South Shore. And a lot of this happened, 30 plus years ago, but we saw, kind of immediate regrowth of vegetation and dune structures by pulling back beach driving access in the really vulnerable areas. So we stopped access by Clark's Cove, and that has allowed a lot of the regrowth of the dune on Clark's Cove itself. That's one of the ponds that doesn't get cut open. And so we have some better dune structure down there, and the grass is regrown. So we tend to weigh that access and use on the property, and then the vulnerability of the property as well. But those have been the actions we've taken. At this point, I don't see us, Hummock Pond is occasionally washing over. It hasn't breached entirely. I don't know that we would necessarily go and close up a breach if it happened this winter. That's something we would track and see what the natural impacts are of that happening, because it is a natural process. So that's one of the things in the foundation we would really look and probably monitor what happens as a result of those natural activities. And I think that's all I had, and I'm happy to take, any questions.
Thank you, Jen. Vince, you're going to follow up.
Just a very simple thing. Thanks, Jen, for that. So far, we've kind of been looking at Cisco Beach and West. I want to just also point out we look at more parts and more areas. I've also been looking at other areas recently, Stones Beach and Nobodere Beach, quite close and well connected. I had some reports that there was issues in that area and that beach driving wasn't possible. It is correct that beach driving has become more difficult. The last few storms have changed the profile of the beach in that area, but the coastal bank itself is still intact and still in place and not getting any significant wash. So that's okay. The profile of the beach in winter generally changes anyway, and beaches become steeper. But I think partly because people have fewer places to go, people want to continue beach driving into the winter. So we're seeing a little bit more beach driving than we normally would. And so, which is great. People getting outdoors is always a good thing. But it just means that at the moment, you can drive on a small section of Nobodere, but going eastward, going westward, it's much more difficult to drive to Surfside. The other areas that I've been keeping an eye on are Low Beach. Low Beach had a pretty incredible erosion event last winter across 2 different storms, where something in the order of 140 feet was lost. Since then, the area seems to have stabilized. The only thing that's worth noting in that area is that if you look at historical erosion maps and now the new erosion hazard map that FEMA brought out, that area was supposedly stable, and now the area is now 140 feet further back than the map currently shows. But other than that, I've also been keeping an eye up around Quidnet. That area is quite stable at the moment. I didn't get to go up anywhere beyond Trustees Reservations property for quite some time, so I can't comment, only to say that I know that they close periodically from flooding and in coordination with NCF.
Thank you, Vince. Other comments? Yes, Jeff.
I promise this will be my last one unless someone asks another question. But just want to kind of follow up on something that Jen had said, because I think it's something that's kind of important to keep in mind. And I know I don't always do the best job of thinking about it, but I was, as she was talking about some of the areas that they have, the spot that always comes to mind for me is down in Mitigation Valley and through that whole area. And the thing that's really great about that spot is all of the valleys all have these really cool vegetated wetlands that run through all of the valleys that are there. But if you look at like the FEMA flood mapping, those are all part of the coastal flood zone. And I think as we watch that beach migrate back, and you see there's, you know, old Sheep Pond is not so much a pond anymore, and it's, you know, mostly fragmites at this point, to be perfectly honest, and kind of filled in. That as the beach rolls back, I think, you know, we're definitely going to see a greater amount of saltwater intrusion into these areas, and these may be, you know, systems of vegetation that not only expand but are going to kind of convert over time to different plant material that may or may not be there. But what's really important about that from my end is when you look at those and they overlay on the map is how many roadways and how many access points that these wetlands intersect with and their flood zones intersect with, that those are going to move and expand and change. That as we're kind of planning, you know, not just dealing with the immediate coastal area for that infrastructure, but what's happening to those, you know, kind of adjacent areas that we're going to see. And I think, you know, I think we took a really good step when we did the MVP program to talk about, you know, finding ways to enhance coastal wetlands and finding protection for those. But I think, you know, starting to look at how we're using roadways in those areas that intersect there to maybe, you know, reroute or relocate and get them clear and let those wetlands be whole, or do those things, I think is, you know, it's not right in that immediate coastal zone in some cases, but it certainly is influenced by coastal processes. And I think that those are going to be important to look at, because those are going to be the ones that we're going to not be focusing on. They're the ones that are going to come back to bite us because they're sneaky and you don't see them. And, you know, the one that, you know, Pulpus Road at Folgers Marsh always rings a bell to me is how far inland that is and how often that floods. And, you know, for lots of different reasons, or, you know, even the roadway that washed away at Sacajah Pond are really obvious ones. But I think, you know, if Sheep Pond fills up with water and comes across, we may have done all of our best to be ready to deal with the corner that's going to wash away. And we're going to be, you know, separated by a boat before we can get to the corner that we've moved. So it's important to kind of look at all of those things and how those wetlands may be migrating too. So I think Jen and Sarah's work is super helpful for looking at that to help model. But just something that, you know I lose track of. I just wanted to kind of keep it on everyone's radar.
Thank you, Jeff. Great point. Further comments? Yes, Matt.
I think
Matt, you're
Jeff's
muted.
point, yeah, sorry. I think Jeff's point is really good, because it's going to be, we think about these issues being in sort of distant areas, Sheep's Pond, Wisconsin, it's all on the fringes. It's going to start being Myacomet Pond. It's going to be down by Hatches. All those, there's a lot of wetlands, a lot of infill that over time is going to want to be wetlands again. And people think that they're all set. We have the select board, we get a lot of complaints about the cellars all around Otokomi and the top of Myacomet that's only going to get worse. And so some of the things that we want Arcadis to be thinking about is, you know, what should our zoning be? What should our rules be? How do we, you know, ensure that we aren't making, you know, we don't target a bunch of development into areas that are going to be problems in 10 years, 20 years. You know, we have enough calls already. So, you know, so though it just, I think my main point is it isn't just the coastal areas. That, you know, it's going to be inland, it's going to be Lily Pond and a bunch of places that are low lying.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Fritz, please go ahead.
Just if I may, in response to Matt. Matt, I think that's where, when I was speaking earlier about one town, Situate, I'm sure there are many, many others, maybe most, I don't know, in Massachusetts coastal towns. The use of a resilience overlay district seems to be one way of getting at that zoning for areas that are very sensitive to coastal resilience and what would be permitted in those areas. And I'm sure it's not going to be popular, but it is something, and clearly something that falls within the planning board or even maybe the planning commission in terms of responsibility. And I'm just going to say it's something I'm going to start raising, and as to whether we ought to be taking a look at it. But I'm sure it's not going to be a popular discussion. And I see Holly smiling.
Thank you, Fritz. Jen, did you have your hand up, or is that, yeah? And then Sarah after Jen.
I was just going to quickly say in response to both what Matt and Jeff were saying, as far as needing to pay attention, honestly, to where the water's going as things change. I think we have resources that we've looked at and that we have given to the consultants, so that hopefully they can begin to look at that. We have the storm tide pathways analysis that was done a few years ago, and you know, that's looking at storm flooding, but it's also a good prediction of where the water is going to go as it increases on island in general. And so that's a resource the foundation is looking at when we're figuring out, you know, how to change some of the roads and access on our properties. And then we just got a few weeks ago, it's called the SLAM model. It's the sea level affecting marsh migration model that was created that really looks at sea level rise changes and how salt marshes and other wetlands are going to migrate and change where they are in response to sea level rise. And that's something that is going to be a really good resource. And I mean, when you look at the maps, to all of us that have lived out here and paid attention, they make sense. They follow a lot of the things that we're talking about here as far as where the water is going to move inland. But we've got some of these resources that I think as the CRAC committee, if we see they're not being represented in the plan the way we expect, we can bring those resources forward and kind of push for some of these things that we're talking about.
Great, thank you, Jen. And Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, some of what I wanted to say was, you know, just echoed by Matt and Jen. We do have some of that information, especially the storm tide pathways and some of the work that Jen and I did, that shows that a lot of the interior of Nantucket is vulnerable, even in the short term. I mean, certainly in the long term, but even in the kind of shorter term, up to 2050, 2035, 2050. But I think that while definitely Arcadis has this information, and I'm sure that it will be used, I think that it's kind of on us and maybe within the outreach tools to start promoting, might not be the right word, but discussing it more broadly, because we know that, you know, we have representation here from Nantucket, from Brant Point, from the areas that are, you know, we all talk about Sconset when there's regular discussions of both erosion and sea level rise impact. And I think there's a lot of the community that doesn't know that the interior parts of the communities that are going to be affected if they're not already. So like to Matt's point, that the basements of around Maya Comet Pond aren't just because the town hasn't opened up the pond, it's because of a lot of other impacts. And so I think that I mention it in terms of thinking about outreach, because if we want the community to have input before the plan is adopted and in place, that it would be wise to have, you know, as I don't know what the exact process is for reaching out to people to get them to come to meetings, or to some, you know, like what the literature looks like that gets put out to get people to have input. But I really think that we should make some targeted efforts aside from the like when we did the MVP process and people submitted input as to what we thought the different, you know, high interest areas were. And of course, everyone picks the same few areas that regularly flood and have had very notable problems. But I think that we really just need to make sure that everyone's aware of what's happening in the interior. And we have some of those tools already to be able to access those neighborhoods, those businesses, once again, the infrastructure roads, so that everyone's aware of it and not just the small few that pay attention to this regularly.
Thank you, Sarah. I remember I wrote down one of the phrases that one of the Arcadis group of consultants used, and that is, we need to create a shared understanding in the community about expectations around sea level rise. And I think that is a lot of what you're talking about. And I certainly hope that we'll be able to do that. The thing that's most important to me is that this, the Coastal Resilience Plan is something that affects the whole community and needs input from the whole community. It shouldn't just be a bunch of consultants saying, you know, here are your options, see you later. Peter has a comment. Do you want to make that verbally, Peter, or do you just want me to read that?
Yes. We reach them through their area association, civic association groups. You reach out to their leaders, and then they disseminate the information by email, so that we make it known, this is what we're doing. We're aware of this problem. Here's your information. Here's a link to the YouTube meeting that talks about it. Here's what we plan to do. I mean, I guess it's not unlike contact tracing. You're reaching all the way down to every single person on the street, but through their leaders, their homeowners associations, whatever, because you frequently get, as those of us who serve on town boards and committees, you frequently get people complaining about how they didn't hear about this meeting, or they didn't hear about that, and how come you didn't tell me? And of course, it's not physically possible to call every single person and tell them about the meeting, but this would be a good way to get down to the ground level, I think.
Let me follow up on that, and then we'll go to Gary, and then we'll go to Sarah. Peter's correct. You know, there are area associations. There are two hiccups to that approach that mean we can't rely on that exclusively. The first is there are some areas that don't have associations. And the second is that unfortunately membership in those associations is very small for some of them, on the order of maybe 1% at most of the residents that are actually in that area. So for some of those associations, it's not an effective way to reach an area's population. It certainly is a way that we can begin, but it's not something we can rely on exclusively. So we're going to go to Gary and then Sarah, and then Vince had a hand up. Vince, do we need to put you in sooner, or?
All I wanted to do is just very, very quickly point out that I sent all committee members the Arcadis Community Engagement Plan, and that talked about an awful lot of different methods of getting the word out, everything from backpack flyers for school kids to engaging with every group possible. And if anyone wants to send more comment on that, I'm taking comment until Friday, and then early next week that's going online.
All right, thank you, Vince. Gary, you had a comment you wanted to add.
Yes, I just want to reiterate what you just said and what Peter said as well. I think the biggest challenge is be in front of us is trying to get the communications to this large group. So much of the fact gathering period is occurring now and over the next few months. And if you recall, this is off season. And so 30,000 people who are on the island during the season are not attuned to it. They're not thinking about the island quite as much. And so the biggest challenge we have to succeed is to figure out how we can get the word out. And because we are dealing with a pandemic, everything is going to be done virtually anyway. And maybe that's a help in a way because it'll encourage more webcasts. And we just have to find a way to make sure that the on-island community and the off-island community knows the availability of sessions where information will be given out that may affect their long-term futures on the island. Big challenge for us, and that's one of the most important things we have to solve as a committee, I think.
Thank you, Gary. I'm just wondering if the good old U.S. Postal Service might be worthwhile to send out information just to create a baseline of awareness in the community, something to every address or to perhaps everyone on the voter list.
I think more likely the newspaper and more likely the Daybreak, those digital news things reach a lot of people on the island, but we should use every means at our disposal to make sure people are aware of what's going on and how they can tune in and find out about it.
Thank you, Gary. Sarah, do you want to offer your comment, and then Peter, and then I see Bruce's hand up as well. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. Initially, I wanted to respond to what Pete said, but in waiting, I have had more comments. I really just think that we already have all the homeowners associations on the list, and I really think that only gets a very small slice of the community, as a lot of people said. Our community is not just homeowners. In fact, a lot of our community are renters. And so I really want to make sure that we are representing our, the full suite of the community. And I think from Arcadis, having like I like the notes in kids' backpacks and the other things. I'm going to go through that more carefully. I'm sorry that I have not yet, Vince, but I think that, within this group and a lot of the different things that we do besides being part of this group, we might have understanding of some of the best ways to advertise on the island. And to Gary's point, Daybreak is a great one for off-island people because a lot of people access it on a daily basis, and things like that I think are creative ways to get at everyone on the island. Having visuals is really helpful, so not just a meeting notice, but maybe some of the maps from like the storm tide pathways that show affected areas. It wouldn't be like a final, like, this is what's going to happen to you, but like, hey, have you checked this out? Like, are you curious? Come to our meeting. I mean, I think we have to be creative because I personally, being part of this committee, really want it to be that everyone that wants to come and feels and is potentially impacted could come to the, everyone obviously can come to the meetings, but I think to Pete's point of people commenting after the fact and saying, I didn't know this, and then you could have gone to a meeting. I think we can be creative about getting people to come to meetings. And I think that, recognizing that all the groups that are represented on the island is important.
Thank you, Sarah. Peter, go ahead. We have a queue of comments coming up. We have 10 minutes left in the meeting, so let's try and be concise so we can get everybody in.
Be quick on what Sarah said about Daybreak. I think we need to definitely be proactive about that and reach out to Bill Farrell and see if we can have a space there every week or every time they post, or at least once a week, that says, this is what's going on, here are the relevant links. And then also we should maybe contact the radio station 97.7 and see if there can be a weekly talk with them, with either Mary and or Vince, so that anyone who's listening is going to hear that. And it's just another way. So that's it.
Bruce, we did recognize you, and then I have some comments coming in from Holly, and I think Vince had a comment as well.
Thanks, Mary. Just two quick comments. You mentioned using the post office to contact people, mailboxes and addresses. I know from experience it's extraordinarily expensive. A better way for the committee to consider, if there's a broader outreach of looking at, rather than weekly whatever, I would suggest perhaps trying to use the property tax mailings that go out, stuffer like they do for the Scholarship Foundation. The other is that, Sarah mentioned renters, and that's a difficult one. But I think that the Realtors Association could be very helpful in getting the word out because they're the primary access point for many renters.
Thank you, Bruce. Holly, do you want to offer your comments verbally?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Quickly, I just wanted to mention that the town has a fantastic public outreach coordinator who helps facilitate a lot of this information. She's pretty much at all staff's disposal. So all we have to do is simply send her an email and say, hey, get this out for us, please. And she'll put it on their social medias, as well as, not to mention, does the town have social media, but also I know Natural Resources has social media that they can also push it out. And then we, as the town, as the CRAC committee, are members of Acclimate, which is also in this effort and are willing to get the information out there for the public, and that also reaches people that are not on Nantucket physically. So I think those would be great avenues for us to use. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Vince, I think we're back to you.
Yeah, and I'll be super quick. One of the ways that I'd like to try and, frankly, use committee members to try and also be included in outreach, if everyone could, through their various organizations, do large email or some kind of a flyer that could go out to give information to people, particularly off island. And in some ways, I think the non-voting taxpayers will be one of the nicest ways of getting as much off island information out as possible. So perhaps that could be something for Gary. There's another way that is a potential for getting information out there. Yesterday in the mail, got a flyer with from the Land Council. They do large flyers or large mailings once or twice a year. If some organization like that, don't know necessarily who, it could be NCF or any other group on island that does such mailings, could have a section on it about the Coastal Resilience Plan and get the information out. That way, via one of our partner organizations, that would be terrific. Wouldn't necessarily be expensive for the Coastal Resilience Plan, I'm sorry to say, but it would be beneficial for all, if that would be an acceptable solution to some organization.
Okay, Jen, I see your hand up.
Just really quick, I was going to say, I think these are all great ideas for getting information out. And I think probably what would be most helpful, just thinking from an organization perspective, is if either as the CRAC committee or the education portion of the CRAC committee, or if we utilize, the public outreach coordinator with the town, if we actually create a model of what they could look like. Is there, a small blurb that can go into every newsletter? Or is there a one-sheet advertisement that we're putting out? So if that gets created by us, or associated with us, then we can start to pass that out really easily. And then it's an easy thing to mail out, and homeowners associations can forward either via email or on paper. I kind of always push the digital versus the paper, but I think we can use whatever outlet makes sense.
Thank you, Jen. Emily, can we unmute Emily Molden, Vince? She had a comment to share.
Oh, thanks, Mary. I was just going to chime in and say that the Land Council would be more than happy to include information on the planning process in coordination with CRAC in any of our publications going forward. Happy to set aside an area in paper newsletters and e-newsletters for updates.
Thank you very much, Emily. Much appreciated. Other comments? Last call. All right, seeing no hands. The last item on our agenda is any committee reports. So we had requested just a sort of more information from the Conservation Commission, but Ian Golding, who is our Conservation Commission rep, is not in the meeting today. They are looking at the standards that they use and preparing to revise them, which is something I guess they do periodically. So we will look for more information on that at a future meeting. Jeff, maybe that's something you can speak to.
Yeah, I definitely can. So the Conservation Commission is kind of in a regular, excuse me, I'm just going to butcher saying that, regular regulatory update for some of the performance standards and issues that are at hand. Also knowing though, I think they're going to update to the best of their ability currently, knowing that when the Coastal Resiliency Plan is finalized and comes out, there may be further revisions necessary to make sure that those meet. But I think there's some other issues that they have that are kind of pressing that they'd like to address. So I think that's kind of where they are in the process, is kind of addressing some of the first things that they've had difficulty with over the last few years, knowing that, you know, probably by the time they try to do it at least every 3 years or so, the next cycle comes up, even if it's before that if there's recommendations from the CRP, that those can be addressed whenever that's ready.
Thank you, Jeff. Other members who have reports from their various committees and organizations who wish to offer anything? Sarah?
Hi, so I'm reporting from the Education Subcommittee. We have not done anything recently. What I do want to report out are two things. One, to Jen's point, I think that it would be great to, whether it's the Education Subcommittee or the group as a whole, to come up with some kind of both standard language for updates that we can send out as newsletters, or picture image thing that we can push out to all the various social media aspects. But the other thing I was going to mention was both, so the committee right now is myself, Mary, and Graham. And Mary and Graham have both said that as of January, they're going to sunset their time with the Education Committee. And so I was going to propose that instead of continuing to have an Education Subcommittee, that the work of education and outreach go back to the full committee. Right now, we're sort of in a waiting pattern. I mean, we're definitely doing work, but in terms of the plan is moving forward, and we're kind of commenting on different aspects as they come out from Arcadis. So I was going to propose that this, as a group, we kind of work on some of this information together. I mean, maybe individuals can come up with drafts and bring them to the group, but rather than have a smaller subcommittee, it might work better to have the full group kind of work on different aspects of education.
Thank you, Sarah. Gary, a comment?
Is there a, there was some terrific ideas thrown out by a lot of you folks about how to reach this large group of stakeholders. And I hope that we try to take advantage of all of them. Is there going to be a website that we could point the public to so that they can find out when they're going to be webcasts or hearings or whatever? Should there be one created by our consultants? Should it be our website? Because I love Bruce's idea about using the tax notices every quarter. 12,000 tax notices go out every quarter. And just think about putting information in there that at least said, this is the website you can turn to find out what's going on with the activities relating to coastal resilience.
Thank you, Gary. I think Vince can answer your question.
Simple answer is yes, and it was one of the reasons I sent out the community engagement plan for comment from the committee. It's going to be one of the first things that goes on the Coastal Resilience Plan page on the town website. Arcadis have also asked me separately if they should have their own independent website for all of this, and I said I'd look into it. The main thing that I would want is that the same information be on both. Having two websites, I can see the advantages and disadvantages. So long as they're saying the same thing, I don't think it'll be that much of a problem. Having to include two websites and everything is the issue, and having divided attentions. Other than that, other things that they're looking at putting on the town website are they're looking at developing an app potentially for people reporting things, so that can be an app on people's phones, so they can send in comments or send in concerns or talk about their own property or areas that they're concerned about.
So Vince, when will we hear more about that?
The page is going to go live hopefully early next week. I'm working on content for that at the moment with Arcadis. It's going to include stuff that we've already seen and had comment on, such as the mission statement that Arcadis developed. other things like the app will be probably later in the year, more like February. I'm also going to be trying to solicit ideas from the committee as well in January for content for that website as well.
Thank you, Vince. Okay, we are at noon. Are there any further reports from committees or comments at this time? Holly did offer a comment. She recommends having just the town's webpage. We might set up something with a redirect the same way that resilientact.org redirects to a town webpage. That might be an easier way to offer a web address that's digestible and typable that still points to one webpage. Anybody else? Sarah?
I just wanted to follow up on the education committee if there was more input or interest, or if I don't, just wanting to make sure what our movement forward is. If there is an interest in continuing a subcommittee, I'm happy to continue to chair it, but I just wanted some input for direction purposes.
Jen and Vince, just a note, why don't we make sure that's the topic on the December 22nd meeting for the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee so that we do have it on an agenda. Jen, did you have anything else or is that it?
No, I can wait until we discuss it as a committee.
Okay.
Bring forward my thoughts.
All right, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
Thank you, Fritz. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Graham. So roll call vote, Gary?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Graham?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you all very much. We'll see you December 22nd.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Vince and Mary.
So Vince, can we set up a call if you have time to go over the stakeholders list specifically? I've got a
Sure.
lot more information and I just keep forgetting to put it together. But if we have an appointment to do it, then I'll make sure it gets done.
Okay, you want to talk tomorrow?
Yeah,
Or-
tomorrow's good.
Yeah,
Anytime.
We have time now. I've got time now, if that's okay. If you don't,
All right,
that's fine.
yeah. We're still recording,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay.